great pleasure to introduce Art O'Leary. Art is head of the Electoral Commission in Ireland, which would make you think he's here to talk about elections. But like many of the speakers, he started doing a hobby next to his regular job, which were citizen assemblies. And in many instances, Ireland is a bit the story we tell about citizen assemblies. And so Art will tell you a bit how that came about, and we'll also tell you a bit about how do you connect this, because this is a national state organizing these things. How do you connect this to your administration, your political level, your parliament? Thank you for being here, Art. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Yves. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, and I've really enjoyed the last 24 hours talking with you all about your own experience, your own motivation for getting involved in citizens' assemblies. I've been fortunate in my life. I'm a civil servant, so I've been fortunate in my life that I've had a whole series of really, really cool jobs, and including the one I have now, for which I am handsomely paid, but I rarely get to do because of events like this. But citizens' assemblies will always have a very special place in my heart. There is nothing like the feeling when you stand on a stage in front of 100 people, randomly selected. They don't really know why they're in the room. There's a sea of faces. Expectant faces, like little baby birds in a nest, waiting for the worms to be dropped in. And you stand on the stage and say, the government has a problem. They don't know how to solve it. Will you come and help us work it out? That puts energy and fire in people's bellies, and it brings them on a journey. We've had 6 national citizens' assemblies in the last 11 years. And every single citizen who has taken part in that process, at the end of it, has said, this was the most amazing thing I have done in my life. And these are extraordinary people. They've had great careers, and they've had children, and they've had all kinds of wonderful things happen in their lives. But they single out this experience as being one of the most important in their lives. Citizens' assemblies have transformed Irish society. Think about those words, because it's not easy to say that. They have changed every single thing about the way we live our lives in Ireland. They've led to constitutional change. We've got a climate action plan. It has changed the way we have conversations about difficult problems. 11 years ago, they didn't exist. Now they are an indispensable part of the infrastructure about how we deal with challenges in Ireland. So, how did that happen? I'm going to take some time now to tell you the story about how that happened, and I'm going to tell you about all the mistakes that I made, and so you won't make them, and how we fixed them and moved on to end up with a system of policy development and decision-making in our country which puts our citizens at the very, very core of it. So, 11 years ago, I was sitting on my sofa at home. About 10 o'clock at night, I was watching reruns of The West Wing, and my phone rang. Now, I don't know about you, but nobody rings me at 10 o'clock at night to say they're having a good day. So I nervously answered the phone. I was the director of communications. I was a senior official in the Irish Parliament. One of my responsibilities was communications. So I assumed that this was a newspaper editor who was ringing to make my life miserable for the rest of the week, And so I nervously answered the phone. Hello. And it was the Irish Prime Minister. And he said, Art, I have a job for you. And I said, well, Prime Minister, this may come as a surprise to you, but I already have a job, thank you, that I quite enjoy. So this is going to be a really short conversation. And he said, no, Art, we have this thing. It's called the Constitutional Convention. It's in our program for government, and it's never, ever going to work. but we have to do it because it's a program for government. And we had a general election in 2011. Ireland had a really tough time during the financial crisis, loss of trust in our political system. We had a government that was elected on the basis of change, transformation. We're going to do things differently here. So one of the things in the program for government was the Constitutional Convention. And I said, well, I don't know what that is, but so tell me a little bit about it. He said, we're going to put 100 people in a room and we're going to ask them a whole pile of really difficult questions. And then when they give us the answers, then we're going to see if we can do something about it. And I said, yeah, you're right, that's never going to work. So why are you doing this? He said, I know. It's in the program. We have to do it. We are a government that delivers on its promises. And anyway, we had a conversation. It lasted about an hour. And so 66 randomly selected citizens, 33 politicians based on party strengths in the parliament, and an independent chair. We're going to spend 14 months in a room considering 12 separate issues. And at the end of this conversation, I said, well, Prime Minister, let me see if I have you straight here. As long as I don't kill anybody or spend any money, I can do whatever I like with this group of people. And he said, I knew you were the fella for me. So I rang my boss in the party. He also nervously answered the phone because it was now near midnight. And I rang my boss and said, listen, I have to go off and do a mad thing. I'll be back in 6 months, keep my seat warm, find somebody else to do the job, and it's not important anyway. So, and nothing astonishes me more that 11 years later, I'm still talking about this experience. And perhaps even more worryingly, I'm still doing it. I ran 2 Citizens Assemblies, national Citizens Assemblies, last year in my spare time. So, anyway, it doesn't cost any money because it comes and it's free. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the journey. That was the start of it. And we had a financial crisis in our country. As I said, there was no money. The state was rooting around the back of the national sofa for coins to pay our teachers and our nurses and our doctors and all sorts. So we had to do this thing as cheaply as we could without killing anybody if we could avoid it. 2 criticisms come up of citizen assemblies all the time. We might as well deal with them now. First one is that we already have a citizen assembly. It's called a parliament. You know, we confronted this question yesterday as well. And the answer to that is very, very straightforward because citizens' assemblies are no threat to the political system. Nobody's trying to replace one with the other. All we're trying to do is find a mechanism to support, enhance, and enrich the way we make decisions in this country. Ireland, like Finland, recently celebrated its 100-year anniversary of the creation of an independent state. And for most of those 100 years, we've created policy using 3 ways. You know, so we elect governments with a manifesto. They tell us what they're going to do when they're in government, and then they go into government and try and fulfill as many of those promises as we can. There's a whole load of people like me exist, civil servants. We'll come back to these in a while, whose job it is to provide advice, independent advice, and to help politicians deliver on their promises. And then there are a third group who are engaged stakeholders. So traditionally, people with skin in the game, people with an interest, they get to input into issues which affect them. All we do with citizens' assemblies is add a 4th leg to this 3-legged stool by asking a group of citizens what they think on the issue. And they take those views and add them into the mix, and it improves the way we make decisions. So politicians don't need to be afraid of citizens' assemblies. They should warmly welcome them as a way of making better decisions. Who wouldn't like to know what the people think about an issue before you make a policy decision that might cost billions? You know, so it's just something to bear in mind. The second big criticism is that it's only a big focus group. You know, we could ask a polling company to do that. And there is one big difference between a focus group and a citizens' assembly, is that with a focus group, you put a representative group of people in a room and you ask them their opinion about things. Who's your favourite political party leader? What's your favourite breakfast cereal? What do you think about abortion, marriage equality, climate change? And then the polling company writes down all the answers and then publishes it and say, here's the news. Here's what the Irish people think on this particular issue, which is great. So it always gets the headlines. With the Citizens Assembly, we put a representative group of people in a room and we fill them with information. We make them experts on their subject. Over the course of 6 or 7 months, we ask them questions and we fill them with information from every perspective. And at the end of that process, then we ask them the question, what do you think about abortion or marriage equality or climate change? So they're the two big criticisms, and that's how we deal with them. Time is moving on. I have done this conversation, by the way, that where it has lasted 2 days. So you should consider yourselves fortunate that this is just half an hour. But there is something going on in the world right now. There is a hunger out there amongst political systems and people. Political systems, they want citizens to be involved in decision making. They just don't understand how to do it properly. Your job is to show them, to help them understand how powerful this mechanism is. And the second thing is that our citizens want to be involved in decision making. Please just ask them. Ask them to put up their hands. Our most recent Citizens Assembly on biodiversity loss, we sent out 20,000 random invitations to households all around the country. We were expecting a response rate of something between 3 and 5%, which meant that we would have had about 1,000 people from which to choose our 100. We had a response rate of over 13%. 2,600 people put their hands up and said, those 6 weekends that you told us about, I can be there those 6 weekends and I can help you solve this problem. So we asked, we're always surveying our citizens. We're insanely curious about them and what they think and what makes them tick. But we asked them why they decided to get involved. About a third said they were interested in the subject, and another third said that they wanted to make a contribution to public policy. But most interestingly, from my perspective, is that 1/3 of them said that citizens' assemblies are the way that Ireland gets hard jobs done. 11 years ago, they didn't exist. Now, the people think that citizens' assemblies are the way we get hard jobs done. We have politicians in our parliament fighting with each other over the order in which their issue gets taken to a citizens' assembly. That's how powerful this can be if you do it properly. So why does it work? Time is moving on. So 3 things, and I'll just cover, Damir covered this really well yesterday, the representativeness issue. Ireland in one room. We're a country of 5 million people. These 100 people have to represent the 5 million in our room. So every single person in Ireland, when they look into that room, should be able to see themselves there. And if they can't see exactly themselves there, they should see their opinion being represented in that room. And this works for us because we invest a huge amount of time. And Damir gave you the breakdown yesterday. But age, region, and gender, you'll find, are very easy. So we've got 51 women and we have 49 men because that's the way that our population is. We've 28 people from our capital city, Dublin, because that represents the population. We've got 12 people between the age of 18 and 24. That stuff is very simple. It gets more difficult then as you delve into the other. You've got social class and people with a disability. We've got 4 farmers in the room because 4% of our population are farmers. We've got 11 people with a disability. We've got 17 people who weren't born in Ireland, because that is representative of our society. We work really hard. If you have time to do this, spend that time on the representativeness of the room, because the results can be astonishing. With our abortion Citizens Assembly, the Assembly members made a recommendation for a really liberal abortion regime for women's health in our country. And it shocked the political system. It shocked the media. In the weeks after the recommendations were made, the politicians were saying, oh, this is broken. This doesn't work. You know, the Irish people will never, ever go for that. Our citizens in the room, 100 people, voted 67 to 33 in favour of this liberal regime. The following year, when the question was put to the Irish people in a referendum, the result was 66-34, which proves two things. One is that room is perfectly representative of the Irish people. And more interestingly, and politicians get scared when they hear this one, more interestingly, the Irish people were much further ahead in their thinking on this particular issue than the politicians were. They simply didn't believe that the Irish people would go for this liberal regime. You know, the behavioral economists, when they look at this stuff now, they call it the wisdom of crowds. You know, so during the pandemic, Irish people were wearing masks on public transport long before the government told them that they had to, because they just looked at the evidence and said, well, I'm traveling on public transport, there's a pandemic on, if I wear a mask, it protects me, it protects my fellow passengers, that makes sense. Why wouldn't I do that? So the government came out 4 months later and said, you have to wear masks on public transport. And we had a national eye roll. You know, yeah, thanks. Yeah, we've been doing this all along. Trust the people. Give them information and they won't let you down. They put their hands up and they do that. So representativeness is hugely important. The second issue Ian spoke about really well yesterday was the way that we select an issue. Not every subject is suitable for a Citizens Assembly. And the temptation, because we stumbled upon this amazing way of solving political problems, is our politicians woke up and said, whoa, every problem that we have, we're going to send to a Citizens Assembly now, but not all of them are suitable. So you might think that nuclear power, in the current climate, maybe nuclear power is the proper way to do, to consider as an energy source for a country. Would that suit a Citizens Assembly? Probably yes. Would you ask a Citizens Assembly to design a nuclear power station? Probably not. There are some things that are best left to experts. So be very careful. It's best, in our experience, because we've done this a couple of ways now, to pick a big, meaty issue that's really, really difficult with a number of different policy options, you know, where there are many, many solutions to this problem. And we did the issue of biodiversity loss, as I mentioned last year. Our citizens, this is them here, this is our Citizens Assembly on biodiversity loss. They made 159 recommendations about how the state should respond to that particular issue. Their commitment to this issue was extraordinary. Binary questions don't work. We found that out the first time. We had a question we were asked by the government, should the president's term of office be reduced from 7 years to 5 years? When I was doing the design, I said, oh, this is going to take about 15 minutes, you know, because this is a simple yes or no. But our citizens said, well, no, we should leave it at 7 years, but while we're here, we'd like to make recommendations on the age of candidacy for the presidency, the nomination process, campaign spending limits, donations, and la, la, la. So when you open up even small questions to a room full of 100 people, I always assume that 10% of our population in Ireland, rightly or wrongly, is either mad, awkward, or difficult. So it's always all of our jobs on the executive when for our first meeting is to find out where the mad people are, you know. So they reveal themselves quickly enough as it happens, and we encourage them. You know, if they're difficult, let's encourage them because we need all the perspectives. The only intervention we make is to ensure that they're not at the same table because they can destroy a table. If you get 2, 3, 4 mad people all together at a table, kaboom, you know, there goes the end of civilized conversation. So, yes, so actually I was talking about the issue. you will find out, even with binary questions, that your ankle bone is connected to your elbow. So there's no such thing. So pick the issue wisely. And the third ingredient for success is the thing that I am going to speak about, is how you deal with outcomes. How you ensure that what the citizens recommend turns into reality. And this is one of the big challenges. We were fortunate. I mean, a lot of this stuff happened by accident, as you will have just heard. But we had a government who came and said, we want the Citizens Assembly to have a look at this. Not everybody is fortunate as us. You understand the wisdom and the power of Citizens Assemblies, but your government isn't there yet. So we do this really, really well in our country. You know, at the very outset, the government brings a proposal to Parliament. Parliament, both houses of Parliament, pass resolutions establishing an independent Citizens Assembly. So my only job, I turn up in the Prime Minister's office with a wheelbarrow and say, fill that with cash, and I'll be back in a year with some recommendations for you. And when we come back in the resolution establishing the Assembly, when we come back a year later, our Parliament agrees to establish a parliamentary committee to consider our recommendations. So what do we think of this? Yeah, this works, that works, won't be able to do that. They make their own recommendations, so the government gets two reports, Citizens Assembly report and the parliamentary committee report. And then in a special debate in the Parliament, the government comes in and they announce which recommendations they're going to accept and when they're going to be implemented, and more importantly, which recommendations that they're not going to accept and why. They give an explanation why. We understand why you made this recommendation, but here's why it's hard for us to do this thing. It conflicts, etc. Mostly they tend to be resource-based issues, you know, and that can be hard, because the one slight issue that the government have with Citizens Assembly, because you're developing an expertise in this issue, then the issue becomes important to you. So if you had all the money in all the world, here's how you would solve this problem. But yeah, we need to run schools, we need to build roads, and we need to do all the other things that we need to do in the country. So resources tend to be an issue. So landing it with the administration is hard. I wore a grey suit today on purpose, because your biggest challenge will be speaking to people like me in the civil service, in the administration. Mostly men, mostly my age, in grey suits and comb-overs and tan briefcases. These are your audience. These are the people that are going to be the hardest to convince, the permanent government. So you need to work on these. I did a great event in London a couple of weeks ago where the audience was civil servants. You know, these are my tribe. You know, they can't recognize me sometimes, but I think that says more about me than them. But I mean, these are my tribe, the guys in grey suits. The first thing we do when a Citizens Assembly is established, I wait for the call. I wait for the call from the guy in a grey suit who says, I can help you with your Citizens Assembly. We know all about this subject. We know the answer to the question, etc. So we'll help you design the program, and we'll help you run the Citizens Assembly. And because we're only here to help. And these meetings and these conversations I have take around 90 seconds, because I'll take out all the bad language in it, but basically we say, Foxtrot Oscar, lads, thank you. The government have already heard your view on this issue, on drug use or climate change, etc., and they think you haven't cracked it. So they've asked us to go and do it. We'll see you in a year. If we want your opinion, we'll tell you it. You know, and the guys in grey suits aren't used to being spoken to like that, but they do get used to it after a while, because we explain that you can't set the exam, sit the exam, and then correct the homework. After that, you need to let somebody else sit the exam. So wear your independence heavily. You need to be independent. You might need to go to some of these guys and say, listen, come and explain to our citizens how you haven't been able to solve this problem for the last 5 decades. So they don't like being asked that. But that happens sometimes. In our first Citizens Assemblies, we had 33 politicians in it, and 33 politicians is hard to manage in a room. I was director of parliamentary committees, so I was used to managing committees in large groups, and I think this is why the Prime Minister asked me to do it in the first place. So it probably wasn't as difficult for me. But the power imbalance in the room is really hard to manage. And it's not just about power, it's about information. As the citizens they learn very quickly that politicians know an awful lot of stuff about an awful lot of stuff. So when you sit down and, well, what do you think about the removal of the offence of blasphemy from our Constitution? Wow, I've no view about that. Tell me something about it and I can give you a view. But politicians, and they love to take the microphone. At our first meeting, I won't mention the individual because I'm on camera and also because this person is now a minister in our government, but he took the microphone on 4 occasions at the first meeting of the first Citizens Assembly, simply to say how important it was that the citizens had a voice. The irony of that was totally lost on the man. I have reminded him since of it, and he's mortified, obviously, but this is the issue. It creates a false dynamic in the room which needs to be managed. So when you're looking at something like an electoral system, these are guys who are elected using this electoral system. Of course they know something about it, so you need to do something to shape the imbalance here. And I've got some great stories about that. If I had time, I would tell you. It's the coolest stories on earth about how creative you need to be in order to manage that imbalance. But the real benefit of having citizens and politicians in the room together is that creates the sense of ownership. Many of the assemblies that have failed all over the world have failed because reports turned up in Parliament and on government's desks and on civil servants' desks that they didn't understand. Where did this come from? Who are these people? Who asked them to do it? When our first report landed, making recommendations to have a referendum on marriage equality, to change the constitution to allow the LGBTQ plus community to get married, then the politicians who received the report said, yeah, I was in that room. That was brilliant. It said, this is how it worked. And the citizens got involved. We heard from everybody, all the different perspectives. This really works. And that's the benefit. In hindsight, it was an accident that we had politicians on our first Citizens Assembly. We haven't had much involvement of politicians in the 5 that happened since. But what it did do was create an institutional acceptance of citizens' assemblies because, this system that we designed and created that delivered this recommendation is absolutely bulletproof. So the first one was successful, and after that, I keep saying, nothing succeeds like success. So that's what you're looking for with your first Citizens Assembly. Try and make it extraordinary. And there is enough wisdom in this room with experts who do this all over the world to be able to tailor this to your community. Now, I've spoken about national assemblies, and Zakia made the point this morning about there are many, many governments all around the world who are not yet ready to make this leap. So the way that it will work will be from the ground up in municipalities. If enough people at the ground level can make a difference here, then governments will sit up and pay attention. I'll just conclude on this one. I was in the United States about a year ago in upstate New York, and it was one of the most depressing experiences of my life because America is a very polarized society, and it's not as if there's no shortage of issues that they couldn't discuss. Roe versus Wade, gun crime, health care, discrimination, all of these things, racism, the whole lot. And nobody was willing to have a conversation about this, which was awful because nobody's willing to move even one single notch in that spectrum of changing their mind. So they couldn't even agree the arrangements to have a conversation in which they might have a conversation, you know. So, but there was sign of hope, and it came from a regional municipal level. There was, in upstate New York, there were 3 small towns, each with a small hospital. And the local healthcare authority said it's pointless. You know, we've got 3 small hospitals not providing the full range of services that they could or should be. We should knock these down and build one big hospital which services all 3 towns. You know, so each of the towns very protective of their hospitals. You know, I said, no, we need to keep it. So they created a Citizens Assembly. Representatives of each of the towns, they put them in a room together for 3 months. And they looked at all of the issues. Transport links. Where's the easiest hospital to get to? Where do nurses and doctors want to live? Where's the best site that we could have this hospital? And at the end, they made a recommendation to build a hospital in one of their towns. None of which was possible before that, you know. So don't limit your ambition to just national assemblies. They are really easy to work, by the way, and they're such a joy. But I mean, if you need to build from the ground up, build something that's meaningful for communities, you know, that can deliver outstanding outcomes for your local communities, and the world will thank you for it. Okay, thank you very much.